God always keeps the revelation of himself bound up with practical situations. You and I can never get revelation other than in connection with some necessity. And isn't that a tremendous insight and an encouragement to us? That it's not necessarily getting off into the prayer closet, as important as that is, or getting in a setting where we can hear from God, but to see in the everyday situations where he's working, to be attuned to the Holy Spirit and where he's active.
Where is God active in your business right now? How would you know? What are you doing to join God in his kingdom work? I'm Ken Powell, host of FCCI's Pathway to Purpose weekly podcast series, and we're hearing from John Beckett, who served as the second-generation leader of the Beckett Corporation of Elyria, Ohio. This content was presented at an FCCI conference many years ago, and the truths are just as relevant for kingdom leaders today. And on this episode, John will share some hard lessons that they learned about values, culture, and how they navigated some tough situations related to leadership promotions and even embezzlement. And you might catch a glimpse of the time frame of this recording when John speaks about the Enron scandal, but don't miss his powerful statement about the values and getting those values from words on a page to strategic implementation, traction in daily employee decision-making. This is the real stuff of Christian business leadership, and it's not typically easy. Here's John.
In talking about values, I'm going to make an assumption, and that assumption is that in your organizations, you have identified a set of core values. If you haven't, then I recommend it. They come into play in so many ways, and one way in which they began taking on substance to me was when one of our plant floor employees walked into my office. His name was Papo, and he said, Mr. Beckett, I hesitate to come to you, but I believe that the company has violated one of its core values. Well, he had my attention. And the story he told was that he had been off on a medical leave during which we had made a promotion internally that he had applied for. And when we announced the person who was the successful candidate, we didn't notify him, but guess what happened? That same day he got calls from 5 or 6 other employees to tell him that he hadn't received that promotion. And he said, you say that one of the core values of the company is profound respect for each individual. And I just don't think this was handled very well. Well, I apologized and I said, I totally agree with you. You should not have heard about this by the grapevine. Dug into it and found that there had actually been a fair bit of discussion internally about whether to call him while he was off sick and tell him that he hadn't received the promotion. The decision was to not do that. So we had compassion working on one side and we had communications working on the other. And the call that our folks made, as it turned out, was the wrong call. Well, Papo and I talked it through. We came out of it in a very good place. But the thing that pleased me was that our values had been driven deep enough into the organization that they would be a plumb line, giving him the confidence to come in and say to the owner of the company, I think that we blew it. That said to me that, well, something's working. We have codified not only our core values, but our mission and our statement of vision and purpose into a document which we call our corporate roadmap. I have some of them out at the book table, certainly not enough for everybody, but you can find it online at beckettcorp.com. And one of the centerpieces of that document is the identification of these 3 values: integrity, excellence, and a profound respect for the individual. They have served us in the same way that your spinal column serves you. I can't underestimate just how valuable these have been from a practical standpoint. However, I would also add that after the fall of Enron, they declared bankruptcy, you may recall, in December of 2001, almost obscured by what happened a few months earlier on September 11. Enron had virtually identically these same core values. And I thought, well, there's a message embedded in that one that it's not enough to have them up on the wall. They have to be driven deep into the organization. What are some of the benefits of having and promoting core values? When Peggy Waymeyer came in to do the story for ABC, the first question that she asked me was, what makes you different from the companies down the street? And we should be asking ourselves that question. Core values can be one of the components that makes our organization distinctive, as long as we live by them. They're a powerful driver for change. You know, no organization is going to survive in today's business climate unless it is willing to change. And that means that you have to be able to advance toward clearly identified goals. Those goals, to me, have to be very consistent with our core values. And yet, if a company is lacking excellence, if that happens to be one of your values, or they're lacking a real respect for people, if that happens to be one of your values, here's an opportunity to move closer to what you say you are. But they're also a proper constraint, as was the case with Papo. They're intended to bring us up short. If we're not following them, they should constrain unruly activity. They didn't at Enron. Do you know that the board of directors of that corporation consciously set aside their code of ethics to do the offshore deals that were the beginning of the end of what was then the sixth largest corporation in America? And it's going to be very interesting as we unpack some of the things that are happening currently, Lehman Brothers and others, to see whether they were hewing to the things they said were important to them. I think that we'll find some surprises. And then obviously they help shape the whole culture of the organization. And as we've expanded into other businesses, as we've expanded abroad, one of the constraints for us and one of the values in our values is to try to get cultural continuity as we go across acquisitions, mergers, foreign operations, leadership changes. If we're doing it right, we'll see that continuity of culture through all that we do. And it's important to us that we try to actually see that happen. How do you drive them deep in the organization? This is something that you need to think about very intentionally if you haven't. And a few of the things that we did that helped us. One was to involve the employees in the process. I mean, it was like, okay, the corporate leadership went up the mountain and we came down with these tablets with, core values on it. But how are you going to help us make them live? I was amazed at the kind of things that people came up with in making these visible in the organization. Went in one day and they had a huge banner suspended from the ceiling of our plant. Let the world know that Beckett will adhere to these core values. I saw them appearing on name badges. I saw them appearing in email headers. They even devised a board game. Walt Wiley would have loved this. It was a board game using our core values to try to talk about them and drive them deeper. We held off-site seminars, often taking as much as an hour apiece on each of these values in small employee groups. And when our son Kevin succeeded me to the CEO of our business, without even discussing it, one of the first things that he did was to get employees together in small groups and talk through what these meant to him. I mean, what a brilliant thing to do in a transition of leadership, to say to all of our employees, this isn't just what the old man came up with. This is something that's important to me, and it's got to be important to you if we're going to work on the same page. More recently, we've developed an ethics policy. This, of course, had to be done in close alignment with our core values. Whenever we have turned to our employees to help us on this kind of thing is the amazing creativity they come up with. Just got to give them some rope, and we had so much fun with this, and yet the points were coming across. Real world, by the way, behind this ethics policy was that a trusted employee, I'm sad to say a fellow believer, had successfully embezzled almost $250,000 from our company in a controller position. So it happens, and that certainly put us to the test of how we would walk that out. God gave us grace, and could have easily gone to prison. As it is, he has almost completely paid it down. He's gainfully employed, and his family is so grateful for an approach that was tough and yet had the kind of compassion that we need to bring as believers. Let me just talk a little bit about leaders. This is a risky topic to talk about because if you Google leadership today, you'll get about 185 million references. If you go to find books on the subject, I think there are about 1,500 in print right now with leadership in the title. So you say, Beckett, what do you have to say about leadership? Well, maybe not a lot other than what has been said, but the scriptures talk a lot about leaders. One of the things that impresses me about those who are identified as leaders in the scriptures is how God always picks an individual when he has a job to do. Isn't that interesting? I mean, we do a lot with teams, and you do too, but he picks individuals, and this was what these had accomplished by faith. Abel and Noah and Abraham and Joseph and Moses and Rahab and Gideon and David and Samuel. Well, look what they did. Who through faith, these are leaders, conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what was promised, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of flames. That was one of my early experiences, wasn't it? Escaped the edge of the sword. His weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Are you looking for those kinds of leaders in your organization? God is continually preparing his heroes, and when the opportunity is right, he puts them into position in an instant. He works so fast, the world wonders where they have come from. Jim Collins, and I'm sure many of you have read his book, makes this important point that great leaders get the right people on the bus, and then they decide where to take that bus. We tend to think the other way around. We'll get everything lined up, and then we'll go out and find the right people. But good to great leaders looked for that person, looked for that talent. And I can tell you, it can be very frustrating. We looked for a person to head our engineering for over a year and conducted a long courtship with a former senior executive at Honeywell before wooing him to come from Minneapolis to northern Ohio, and yet the impact that he's had has been absolutely enormous. One of the most important, and I've heard it said, the most important thing that a CEO does is to identify the best leadership that he or she can find. Well, recruiting leadership is one thing, but developing is an ongoing process. One of the tools that we use is the talent matrix here, where we're continually looking at our people to say, are they moving into positions or capacities for greater responsibility? Great leaders will spend time with their team, and of course we have no better example to look to than Jesus and how he built his leadership team. We have various means of assessment. And if you're not using performance evaluations in your company, you should be. Not so much to look back, but to look forward and help your people identify and forge their future. I was doing it annually, and I thought I was doing a great job, and Kevin, our son, is now doing it quarterly. And it's a big burden. It's a pain in the neck, as a matter of fact. But it means so much to be sitting down and having that dialogue about where people are and where they're going. This is such a powerful concept for those of us in the workplace. And of the great people whose insights I've gleaned from, perhaps none more than T. Austin Sparks in a little book called The School of Christ. And buried in there is this insight that I think applies to all of us in the workplace, that God always keeps the revelation of himself bound up with practical situations. You and I can never get revelation other than in connection with some necessity. And isn't that a tremendous insight and an encouragement to us? That it's not necessarily getting off into the prayer closet, as important as that is, or getting in a setting where we can hear from God, but to see in the everyday situations where he's working, to be attuned to the Holy Spirit and where he's active, because this is where the revelation will come. And I must say that I have found that time and time again.
Well, it's worth repeating again. God always keeps the revelation of himself bound up with practical situations. We cannot get revelation without some connection to a situation of necessity. To see God in the everyday situations where God is working and where the Holy Spirit is active. Well, this is why FCCI exists and is here to serve you. We desperately want to know that God's revelation is clear through your business and that you are growing in your implementation of God's plan through your business for his glory. Learn more about how we can serve your leadership journey at fcci.org. Well, thanks for listening, and may God's design for your life and business become increasingly clear as you seek to join with God, transforming the world through Christ.